Hello, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the 2022 Spring Summit. And my name is Tony Jaroszewski. I'm the Director for Network Pre-Sales for Ahead. And today I'm going to go over the subject of, can your networks do this? And what we're going to be going over is a hybrid cloud networking reference architecture. So let's jump into it. So the first piece that we looked at is, what are a lot of those connectivity attributes that the modern company or the company of the future is looking to gain? So some of the things that we saw commonality, whether any vertical that we talked to, is they wanted to have flexibility. They also wanted to account for, how do I bring mergers and acquisitions on at a quicker pace to realize the benefits of those mergers and acquisitions. Obviously, high performance is key. As I'm moving my workloads, whether it be SaaS or cloud, I want to maintain or gain performance so that I have a better user experience. Some of the other pieces that we found to be commonality is, automation. How do I eliminate those manual errors? How do I get things pushed out faster, but also knowing that it's going out in a good state? Because really what we're trying to solve for is my workers and my workloads are everywhere. COVID has kind of kicked this into high gear, but what we've seen is the days of workers being in a branch office and my applications only being in my on-prem data center, those are gone. Right now I have my workers everywhere and my workloads everywhere. They may be in cloud, SaaS, on-prem, or a mixture of all of that. And we got to have a network and a security construct that can account for that. And the last piece we've looked at is, now that I'm changing this network and security construct, how do I have the tools to support this for day two? How do I have visibility and troubleshooting tools so that I can get quick resolution to the problems that come up? So, let's kind of look at, the second piece is, let's look at what legacy look like with our customers. A lot of our customers have this type of network that's out there, or this type of topology. We don't look at this as a negative. We understand there's reasons why we originally put these designs in place back when we did this. Some of the reasons why we did this, if I had a hub and spoke topology, it was easy to control traffic. I knew where traffic was going to go. And I also knew where I could put my security policy because I had one single ingress or egress portion for all of my traffic. So that allowed me to consolidate that so that I didn't have to put security policy all over the place, and I could put it in one spot and kind of concentrate my efforts. It allowed me to add multiple types of service. So if I wanted to add additional services, whether it was DNS security, URL filtering, quality of service, etc., it allowed me to have that single point of doing that. But what we found is, if I go back into a driving analogy, this really put us more of that AAA driving map. So what we've seen there is, we didn't really have ability or to have any intelligence in the network. What we said is, data went from point A to point B, and it was going to follow that little yellow line like that was on the AAA drawings, when we were given those when we were younger. But there was no intelligence to say, well, what if there's an accident? Or what is a better route? Or how do we get there faster? We kind of had to follow that yellow line. And that's really what our networks look like, and when we looked at these legacy designs. So when we coupled that with things like adding cloud, adding SaaS to this, we've noticed that we incurred a lot of issues with the legacy networks and how they're designed and how they perform. What we've seen is, performance typically went down because it wasn't the quickest way to get to the routes. Security also became an issue because how did I instantiate security? That really meant I had to have all my traffic come back to the data center, even though it wasn't meant to go there. So again, this became a very expensive and slow way to design things. And we figured there needs to be a better way. We need to have a better topology that we can move forward with. So the first thing that we did look at is a modern topology. We wanted to have this modern topology be based on certain aspects, like I wanted to have an intelligent network. I wanted that network to be able to understand, where do I have slowdowns? What is a better route? And make those changes on the fly without manual intervention. I also wanted to have performance based on the application. So if I have business critical applications, I want to give them more resources than, say, other things that don't mean as much. Maybe guest Wi-Fi or basic internet for guests shouldn't get as much as my business critical ERP application. The other pieces that we need to have with this, we need it to be fast to provision. Again, I don't want to wait days, weeks, and months to be able to provision out this new network. I want to be able to roll this out quickly in an automated fashion so that I know that I'm eliminating or minimizing the manual errors. And this really lends into the mergers and acquisitions that we talked about earlier, is customers want those mergers and acquisitions pulled into their networks as quick as possible, but done at a very, efficient manner. So really what we're trying to do is go from that AAA driving map experience that I explained in the last slide to more of a Waze driving experience. I want to have that intelligent type of network or experience, again, that the changes are being made automatically. And really what we're talking about in this fashion is getting into things like SD-WAN. And SD-WAN is going to address a lot of these aspects that we just talked about with the intelligence of the network. But it did cause some problems because we did realize when I moved to this new type of network topology or design, I did open Pandora's box on security because, again, we had a single egress point security, setup that we did in the beginning that doesn't work anymore because now I'm going directly to those workloads. So we did realize the first piece that we had to address was how do we redesign security to be able to handle this new modern topology? And how do I handle going directly to those workloads? So the first thing that we looked at is taking that modern topology that we talked about with the network and how do we instantiate security right into it? And it became a combination of SD-WAN and SASE, which is Secure Access Service Edge. And really what we're looking at here is how do I get my users, no matter where they are? They could be in the campus, they could be on a branch office, they could be at home, they could be at Starbucks, it could be a third-party contractor. But how do I give them the capabilities based on no matter where they're at to access securely the applications that I want to give them? So I'm going to have the ability to allow them to, access the data center, access public cloud, SaaS, or internet. But what I'm doing is I'm instantiating that security right in the middle of it so that I know no matter where my users are, they're getting the same security policy that's tied to them, rather than having them do things like VPN back to a data center to go to something in the SaaS world, maybe Office 365. So really diving deeper, when we start looking at SASE, or again, that Secure Access Service Edge, Gartner has also thrown other terms out there. You may hear it as SSE. SSE is Secure Service Edge, and really what that's doing is that's not including the SD-WAN piece, but SASE has now combined things like SD-WAN and the Secure Service Edge into, one Gartner term. But again, what we looked at with SASE, and this becomes the important point of how we change this modern topology, is number one, as you can see in the middle of this design, identity is the new perimeter. So this is really a key point to the security model. I no longer can rely on IP addressing or access lists because, as we know, as my users move and my applications or workloads move, the IP address is always changing. So I can no longer base my security policies on that IP address because it's always changing. So I really need to be looking at identity as that new perimeter. How do I understand who that user is, what they should get access to, and they only need to get enough access to do their job. So really moving towards that least privilege model. And as you can see, what this allows me to do is have secure connectivity from things like my branch office, mobile devices, IoT, remote workers, or third-party contractors. So if I want to allow users into my network or have access to my workloads, this gives me that one point of security policy to allow all of this. But also, as you can see, there's a lot of features that are included in the SASE model. So things like CASB, next-gen firewall, URL filtering, DNS security, DLP functionality. It really ties all of those services that we used to have back in the data center into one cloud-delivered model. What we had in the data center is probably a stack of multiple different appliances or services that were doing this. A lot of them were relying on hardware, so it always had to be scoped and to proper throughputs and being able to handle different workloads, or if we've increased workers, how do I scale that? Having this type of model, again, really pushes us towards that cloud-based model that can grow as our company grows. And really what this is a key point to, I'm sure everybody's heard zero trust security models. And that would be a whole nother hour of conversation that we could get into at least. But really a lot of the basis when we start looking at zero trust or zero trust for our user base really looks into this SASE model. So not only are we looking at some of the hybrid cloud reference architectures, but we're starting to tackle some of those questions around zero trust as well. So everything that we've talked about so far is kind of how do my users get to the cloud, not really into the cloud for networking, but get to them. And what we've seen with our customers today is they've also been connecting to multiple clouds. At first it came out and customers might have said, I'm only going to be an AWS shop, or I'm only going to be an Azure shop. And what we've seen is customers are doing multiple clouds. And the reasons why are, they may have an EA with Microsoft, or they might be doing their front end with Azure, but maybe need the GCP analytics. And what we've found is we need to be able to have that capabilities to give that on-demand connectivity to spin up these new clouds and have connectivity to different clouds, but also start to lay down an underlay fabric, because we want to have this routing fabric that allows us to say, put your applications wherever based on your business needs, but let's go ahead and create a network and security construct that spans that. So really what we're talking about is software-defined direct connects, and this allows us to get those quick wins where we can spin up on demand again and get that visibility and connectivity to multiple clouds at a moment's notice, and not have to go through long-term provisioning, and waiting for circuits to be dropped in. And this kind of gives, an overall picture view of what some of that software-defined direct connect would look like. And as you can see in this picture, the customer may be going through an NFV device, but really what we're doing is we're allowing that connectivity to be spun up at any time on demand to anything that you see here. You may have AWS, Azure, it may be to other SaaS providers like Salesforce or Office 365. But what we're really allowing us to do is have that connectivity or put that underlay network to get to these multiple clouds. So the next step we're going to talk about, we talked about how do we get to these clouds, but we didn't talk about is how do I network in those clouds. Because when I start looking at multiple clouds or multi-network, multiple cloud networks, every one of these clouds does things a little bit different. Back in the days when I had all of my apps and networking in the data center itself, I had visibility, I had tools, whether it was NetFlow tools, packet capture tools. I had a whole tool bag of troubleshooting that as a network engineer I could dive into and really diagnose what a problem was. Well, as we started moving into the cloud, we started seeing some gaps. Number one, we started to see some of the visibility tools that were in the cloud really didn't give us the visibility that we used to have to see drop packets, etc., and really dive into those stats of what's going on. Other things that we saw is skills gaps. How do I have my network team spun up to be able to build out, say, network constructs in AWS and Azure, because they all do things different, and GCP might do it different as well. So now you got to spin up and have skills training for your network team for every single one of those clouds as you move into those. And also the other piece is how do I make this repeatable? How do I get away from that manual intervention of being able to plug and type things in? So this is where we started to look at, well, how do I create that network and security construct that spans a single cloud or multiple clouds so that the business decides on where we go, and the network and security just say, okay, go ahead and do that. So some of the things that we're going to look at is, I think I went to the wrong slide, is the multi-cloud network architecture. So really what we're looking at here is how do I have, this could be a single cloud or a multi-cloud instance, but how do I start to instantiate multiple different services like networking services? So how do I have that singular network so I don't have to understand the deep dive capabilities or traffic configurations of GCP, AWS, or Azure? I want to have one singular network construct that spans all of my clouds. Also looking at things like security services. How do I do encryption between the clouds? Maybe I have compliance requirements that say I have to do this. But the other big pieces are, how do I have operational capabilities? So how do I have the visibility to do the troubleshooting so that when somebody calls and says, hey, we've got a network issue with our application, and maybe some of it sits in AWS and the other half sits in Azure. How do I troubleshoot that effectively? and be able to do things like traffic steering for security so that I can do service insertion, whether it be next-gen firewalls or piping traffic off to SIMs or other analytic devices so that I'm able to really get a full picture of what's going on. So again, our goal here is to create that singular network and security construct that says, you know what, put your apps wherever you'd like. We're going to go ahead and have a security construct that's going to be able to do that. So when we break this down and we kind of look at all of the aspects, that we've talked about. So, we've looked at saying, you know what, we're going to have applications that may sit in any one or all four of the clouds. And we have different methodologies that we're looking at. So how do my branch offices, how do I utilize things like SD-WAN to have an overall network fabric, again, that has intelligence, self-healing capabilities, performance based on the application, but also how do I get directly to that? Again, that's where we instantiated some of the things like SASE to be able to say, if I go from that branch office, I don't want to go back to my data center. I want to go directly from that office to the cloud instance or to my SaaS offering. Other things that I look at was how do I spin up different private connectivity? So how do I do those software-defined direct connects so that I have direct connectivity from my on-prem data centers to any one of those clouds again, or the SaaS providers? And then also, how do I take that SASE instance for my remote users so that if they're at Starbucks or I have a third-party contractor and they're not on my corporate network, how do I make sure that they get the proper security policy that says, yes, they can go there or no, they cannot? So again, this kind of shows how everything's brought together to get to that cloud network from the multiple different spots, whether, again, we talked about branch offices, on-prem, data center, or remote users. So it kind of shows all of those brought together in one nice slide. So at the end of the day, when we look at what our real world customers look like, we start to look like something like this. And this may look complex, but really what we're trying to solve here is I have one network construct. You can pick any one of the clouds that are shown here or have stuff on-prem. And again, this allows me to have that capability, to have the visibility to troubleshoot, figure out what's going on, effectively segment. Maybe I have mergers and acquisitions in different clouds, but I want to segment that traffic, or maybe they're in the same cloud and I want to segment VPCs for PCI compliance reasons. This allows me to do all of that in a very effective manner. So usually the next step that we show customers is kind of taking a lot of the aspects in designs and architecture that we just talked about, and we start putting it into this a la carte menu. And this is not all of the products that are out there, but it starts to give our customers an idea of some of the examples of products that they may have, or some of the ones that we would recommend to them to say, you know what, we need to look at SASE. Here's some of the players that we have today, and maybe we can give you recommendations, or maybe you have some of these already in play. So again, this gives us a nice idea to understand what's out there on the product side, but also to make sure we're not forgetting things like visibility or automation, or maybe things like application performance, because maybe it's not a network issue, but maybe we want to dive into the actual performance of that application. And lastly, some of those common next steps that we see. Again, that we have multiple workshops that we work with customers. So whether it's SD-WAN workshops, SASE workshops to determine what's the best way to do SASE and instantiate that security policy for our customers. But then also looking at what does that architecture look like for that singular or multiple clouds. So again, do you have compliance requirements? Where is that workload going to reside? And how do we do traffic flow? How do we have security designs that instantiate security, but allow us to get there effectively? So we go back to those first attributes from the first slide where we talk about, I need flexibility, I need the high performance, and I also need to do this in an automated fashion and be able to support this in day two with operations and visibility. And then the last piece that a lot of times we look at is making sure we're tying in automation. Especially on the cloud front, how do I tie what maybe the automation that you're doing in the cloud to some of the automation techniques that we can roll out on-prem? So again, these are some of the common next steps that we see with this. So again, that's pretty much everything I have today, and I want to thank everyone for coming to this session. I'll be open for questions afterwards, but again, thank you for your time and much appreciated.